So this is a review on the review of Kana Viviksi and Pamela. Funding consent is a factor in sexual assault prevention. Let's proceed to the purpose of this review. So the purpose of this review is to obstruct or to stop the inconsistencies in the definition of sexual consent that may determine which behaviors constitute sexual assault and rape, and in turn affect victims' rights as well as convictions and sentencing rates. Insufficient standard definitions resulted in many aggressors serving little to no time in jail. So another purpose of this review is to specifically define consent and to educate college students about its meaning would affect the prevalence or what is normalized of sexual assault rather, and also to investigate the effects of operationally defining and understanding consent and consensual sexual behaviors on the behaviors and attitudes of college students to function as a deterrent for sexual assault or as a discouragement to stop sexual assault. And let's proceed to the study. Now, what is with the consent and the justice system? So, there is not enough conviction of rape without evidence of force or threats. No can sometimes be interpreted as maybe or what is commonly known as token resistance in the court, in which few studies have shown that 40% of women have engaged in token resistance, suggesting that although they verbally said no, they had every intention of engaging in sexual activities. So women can sometimes be confusing. And what are the reasons for token resistance? So according to Lenhard and Hollenbow, 1988, women have fear of appearing promiscuous or an act of having more than one sexual partner, and practical reasons such as fear of pregnancy, desire to be the one in control, emotional, religious, moral reasons, get partner more aroused, uncertain about partner's feelings, embarrassed about own body, fear of sexually transmitted disease. So apparently these are the reasons of why women are hesitant or have these token resistance in engaging in the sexual activity. So 68% of women reporting saying no when they meant maybe. And nonverbal and indirect cues are also factors indicating sexual consent. The data analysis of sexual behaviors may be used against the victim, allowing the defense to portray the perpetrator as confused by the victim's token resistance. So another paandar that the defense lawyer will give to the court is the forcible compulsion law, which states that for a conviction of rape, the victim needs to offer more than verbal resistance. The absence of verbal and physical resistance will result in the charge being overturned and the defendant serving less time. So, such in the case in the 1992 case of Commonwealth versus Berkowitz, which the defendant continued to engage in sexual intercourse with this victim while she was intoxicated, ignoring her protests and refusal to give consent. She did not fight back, claiming she was pinned down by his weight. The defendant was convicted of rape by a jury, but the conviction was overturned and later reduced to indecent assault. The defendant served less than 6 months in prison. It's because the lack of physical resistance from the victim. And they will also use, the defense lawyer will also use these credibility assessments, which i-background check nila ang victim, their personal informations, social behaviors, political affiliations, connections, ilan ang i-background check, and then they are going to use that against the victim. and hence they will more likely play the victim blaming. So as you can see, victim blaming and the use of credibility assessments towards the victim are intended to appeal to the jury's cultural cognition and potential biases, increasing the likelihood that a verdict will be biased in the favor of the defendant. Cultural cognition occurs when individuals in the jury adapt their opinions to match their values and beliefs about the victim's cultural and social identity. And defense lawyers might try to depict the victims as responsible for the sexual violation just because of their color, their low socioeconomic status, which are often portrayed as meriting sexual assault by being stereotyped as being drug users, engaging in promiscuous activity, and lying. And this is so unfair for the victims because the more scrutinizing and hostile the defense lawyers, the more distressed the victims often become, and the more likely they will have a difficult time holding up during questioning. This victim blaming is putting the victim not only in a very difficult spot, but also we must consider the mental and emotional abuse that she went through from all of that blame, from all of that assault. She still gets the blame, and that sucks. So married women and prostitutes experience victim blaming. And why though married women? Marriage is commonly perceived as the gateway to continuous and lifelong sexual access by a partner. Rendell and Haskell found that out of 420 victims, husbands, boyfriends, or partners committed 30% of the rapes. And 8 of the 10 cases of rape, the victim knew the perpetrator. Completed forced penetration, attempted forced penetration, or alcohol drug facilitated completed penetration that was accounted for almost in 1 in 10 cases committed by partner rapes. According to Farley and Barkan, they investigated violence against prostitutes in the San Francisco area, which they found that 82% had been physically assaulted, 68% had been raped, 68% met the criteria for PTSD, or the disorder that a mental health condition that's triggered by a terrifying event, either experiencing it or witnessing it. So it could be that she was abused badly. She get the PTSD after the traumatizing event. And it is inaccurate to presume that prostitutes give consensual access at all times. Now, in the United States, the definitions of sexual assault and consent varies by state. Example, in California, they criminalize sexual intercourse that happens without the consent of at least one of the participants. Rape falls under the broader category of sexual assaults, such as groping, unwanted sexual advances. In Michigan, defines sexual assault as any form of unwanted sexual contact obtained without consent and or obtained through use of force, threat of force, intimidation, or coercion. Non-explicitly defines consent, which can create problems of interpretation. In Texas, they define sexual assault as when a person intentionally and knowingly commits any of numerous prohibited sexual activities listed under Texas sexual assault law without the victim's consent. So, As you can see, wala dyo'y universal or standardized definitions for sexual assault and consent. Lain-lain pag yung taga-state. So that create problems. Problems in defining consent. New terms and phrases that can have multiple definitions and meanings. Or the ambiguity. Example, hooking up, friends with benefits. Because, for example, hooking up. So hooking up, example is evident as a 2015 case in which a graduating high school senior was convicted of sexually assaulting a 15-year-old classmate. In a competition known as the Senior Salute, the perpetrator emailed the victim to ask if she wanted to hook up. Believing the phrase hooking up meant kissing, the victim met the perpetrator at privately designated area where the assault took place. So the victim agreed to kiss, but resisted several times when the perpetrator began forcefully initiating other sexual advances. Thus, the perpetrator, though, was sentenced to 1 year in jail, 5 years of probation, and was registered as a sex offender. So, the term can be perceived differently depending on one's community, personal values, and close associates. The ambiguity may create problems with communicating sexual interest and consent. Ambiguity in terms used to communicate sexual desires and behaviors also contributes to rape culture. So, what is rape culture? It occurs in an environment in which rape and sexual assault are normalized due both to their high prevalence and in reactions to a negative societal disposition towards sexuality and gender issues, factors that it perpetuates in college campuses. Silencing, denying, minimizing, and blaming victims for their traumatic experience. The argument that no means yes, bringing up the victim's sexual history and accusing the victim lying. So here in the Philippines, rape culture is also silencing, denying, minimizing, and blaming victims for their traumatic experience. Nothing different from the other countries though. But rape culture in the Philippines, I immediately think of the older generations where they tend to have this mindset of blaming the victims for what they wore, for how they act, what time they went out, where they went, the setting of the sexual harassment where it occurred. And they also have this argument that no means yes, bring up the victim's sexual history and accusing the victim lying. Hence, the low reports of sexual harassment also includes how women are embarrassed to report, to tell the officers because of their past. And so in the USA, they have this rape shield law to prevent a credibility assessment. In the 1970s, it was passed in Michigan to protect victims during court proceedings by prohibiting the introduction of their sexual history or reputation as evidence against them. So, in the court, they will put the sexual history or reputation of the victim aside, since it is not their right to do so. I'm glad that they have this rape shield law. And in the rape culture, athletes are more often reported as perpetrators of sexual assault on college campuses than any other group. Fraternities and sororities members are most likely associated with a sexual assault when majorly they are under the influence of alcohol and engage in sexual activities and behaviors. Research has suggested that the ambiguity surrounding definitions of rape and consent may contribute to the low rate of sexual assault reports by women when such ambiguities may lead victims to question their experience. So, karon that we have ambiguities in defining rape and consent, kamay ra ang mga sexual reports for women since magduwa-duwa sila if what they experienced was really a sexual assault or dili. So it is really important for women to give a concrete answer if they would really engage in that sexual activity, and to also for the men who should be considerate or question their partners if they would really participate in that sexual activity. So this result to the denial of the victim's part, and they may believe they are at fault for miscommunicating their consent. And their slut shaming will also occur in around the social circle, wherein it also contributes to the low reports of sexual assault. Like things like hearing your friends, lagan mangud ka, purikat mangud ka, and that when you actually been harassed, you are going to consider that you are one. So self-blame pa rin. And here arises the peer pressure or the influences of our friends on how we should behave and interact with others, that we adopt what are known as sexual scripts or how we communicate to our potential sexual partners. These factors affect how sexual interest, consent, or non-consent is communicated between potential sexual partners. These two, sexual scripts and peer pressure, contribute to barriers that interfere with effective communication and interpretation of sexual consent. So, once I gituan sa imong circle of friends will alter the way how you perceive things, if makakabalo, it is actually a harassment that is occurring now, but then your friends considered it as okay, but then you have at the back of your mind, you think that there is something wrong. So what is the sexual script theory? We have here the cultural level. It refers to developing perceptions of appropriate sexual behavior by learning from society groups. So instances is when a woman is sexually assaulted when walking alone at night or groped in public because she is wearing provocative clothing. So cultural sexual scripts also incorporate the societal expectations of men and women's sexual desire, which is what I mentioned earlier, how our older generations think that it is in the victim's revealing clothes provoke the perpetrator. Ana kay hala, din ana man ko kag sanina, gawas man ko kag inanang orasaha, yanha man ko ka anang lugaraha. Nya alangan ang men dili mo tanggi anang grasya nga naa sa imo tubangan, which is very wrong. The second level is the interpersonal scripts. So interpersonal scripts focuses on the interpretation of sexual cues, including communication, sexual interest, both non-verbally and verbally. So with interpersonal scripts, sexual consent is often assumed during this process of interpreting cues unless someone verbally expresses non-consent. The third level of sexual script is called intrapsychic scripts, which permits individuals to have a unique understanding of sexual behavior. So it is your personal interpretation on someone's sexual advances and behavior. So these scripts may permit individuals to define personal sexual behaviors in ways specific to their own desires, which is why individual explanations of sexual behaviors differ from explanations of larger cultural sexual behaviors. Moving on to the sexual consent policy. These policies stressed the importance of specific direct verbal communication with the sexual partner for each sexual act in which a pair intended to engage. So we must stop the no token resistance, in which the perpetrator would give us the confused card. So women should give a specific and direct answer if they are willing to participate or willing to engage in that activity. Affirmative consent. It requires all students to establish consent regardless of the relationship. Regardless of uyab ba o dili, it is always important to have a, like the sexual consent policy, specific direct verbal communication agreement. Sexual consent programs. These are the programs in which interventions inform students not only about consent but also how social norms, gender roles, and sexual scripts lead to internalized behaviors such as male aggression and belief in rape myths. So these are programs to educate students how social norms, gender roles, and sexual scripts lead to internalized behaviors like the male aggression and the stereotype belief of how athletes are more likely to be the one perpetrates. Conclusions and limitations. So the study is informative and essential to college students, especially that the author purposely wants to meet and have a universal definition for sexual consent that will help obstruct sexual assaults and the injustice that comes along with it. More importantly, the study prevents sexual consent from being misinterpreted and used against the sexual assault survivor. The need to start educating people about the importance of expressing and interpreting verbal and nonverbal consent, understanding rape culture, sexual scripts, and ambiguous terms. By that, it will give the people the tools to recognize gender stereotypes and assess their own behaviors. The thing is, the study needs more enhancing, and recent researchers are necessary to successfully implement actively functioning programs, especially in this age of social media. Ideally, determining comprehensive standard definitions of these concepts will in turn decrease the frequency of sexual assault on college campuses. That's all. Thank you.